We're here at Town Hall with Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein. My name, by the way, is Colin Beavan. I'm also known as No Impact Man, and I am a candidate for Congress in Central Brooklyn. And just like a traditional town hall tonight, you'll have the opportunity to learn more about Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein and her proposed policies related to climate change. If you have questions for her, please use the commenting features on live stream or YouTube, the video platforms we're airing on, or you can post your questions on Twitter or Google Plus using the hashtag #ClimateTownHall. That's hashtag #ClimateTownHall. Just before we could go to Jill, I just wanted to say briefly, somewhat briefly, what Bill McKibben had to say, which was basically that we're in a planetary emergency, that this past summer is the third hottest summer on record, and that the drought in the Midwest have severely caused the price of food to go up, which is a problem that will continue to happen. And that we need to take action immediately to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent chemicals that we're putting into the atmosphere by stopping the burning of fossil fuels. So just to give you a brief introduction to Dr. Stein, she is the nominated at the National Convention. The Green Party had a National Convention and nominated her as the Green Party's presidential candidate. She is a mother, a physician, a longtime teacher of internal medicine, and a pioneer in environmental health. She's running on a platform which she calls the Green New Deal. And I'd like to kick off with Dr. Stein by asking, can you tell us about the Green New Deal?
Yes, and thank you so much, Colin, for hosting tonight, and thanks to Bill McKibben for having been with us, and to the many people who've joined us tonight, and also to those who are working the technology here to try to make it work for us, and keep our fingers crossed and keep going while we're on, and let's hope that it holds. As Bill made the case, and he always does so well, and as he summarized, we are very much at the breaking point, not only for the climate, but also for people, for our democracy, for education and healthcare, and so many other things. But the silver lining in that is that we have the power to get to critical mass and to actually dramatically change things. So fortunately, there are real solutions that can actually be brought to bear. The Green New Deal is an emergency solution to the climate crisis and also to the economic crisis. The Green New Deal is based on the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression in the 1930s, and it basically creates jobs, unlike the policies of both Democrats and Republicans, which are essentially trickle-down economics and have not solved the economic emergency. We know that the New Deal actually has a track record, and it can create jobs, and it does so by directly creating them, not by providing tax breaks and crossing their fingers and hoping that those tax breaks will result in jobs. The Green New Deal is a green version of that New Deal from the 1930s, and it basically puts resources in the hands of communities to create jobs in the areas that they need to become sustainable. So it prioritizes the traditional areas of the green economy, including clean renewable energy and conservation and efficiency, as well as local and regional sustainable organic agriculture and public transportation, as well as clean manufacturing. It also creates jobs in the social areas of the economy so that communities can also meet their social and economic needs, including teachers and nurses, daycare, after school, violence and drug abuse prevention, rehabilitation, and affordable housing construction. The Green New Deal would create jobs both in the private sector and in the public sector. So in the public sector, like the New Deal, it would create public services and public works. For example, constructing the transportation systems that we need, repairing our environment and land conservation, restoring forests, and so on. So it would create those public services and public works so that if you need a job, you don't have to go down to the unemployment office. Instead, you can go down to the employment office and collect a check, actually doing a job that makes your community more sustainable, more just, and more peaceful. At the same time, the Green New Deal also provides jobs in the private sector by providing grants and loans, zero interest loans, and incentives to jumpstart the small businesses, and that is community-based small businesses, not multinational corporations, but rather small businesses that provide jobs and provide dollars that can help jumpstart the local economy and that recirculate within that economy, making every dollar count for more. So fundamentally, we want to jumpstart the economy in many ways and provide what would be a budget about the size of the stimulus package in 2009 and see not 2 or 3 million jobs, which is what we saw with the Congressional and Obama stimulus package, but rather 25 million jobs, which would ensure that everyone gets a job, we put an end to unemployment, and that we're creating living wage, community-based jobs that are a win-win for climate, for the economy, and for making wars for oil obsolete.
And Sharon Abru has left a question on jillstein.org, and she's asking, do you support the shifting of federal subsidies away from oil, coal, and nuclear to help get these jobs going?
Absolutely. We're spending somewhere on the order of, it's estimated anywhere from 15 up to about $60 billion a year on fossil fuels and nuclear. And these are dangerous, dirty, expensive energies in the case of nuclear. And those subsidies should be withdrawn and put into helping to jumpstart the forms of energy that we urgently need to create jobs and to make us sustainable. I would add that for every dollar spent in fossil fuels and nuclear, you can create 3 times as many jobs by using those dollars in the renewable energy and conservation areas.
Brett Cease from Google Plus, Jill, is asking, do you support a carbon fee and dividend, basically, which, just for listeners who don't understand that, where we charge a fee on use of fossil fuel, and then instead of using that to fund government programs, actually divide what's made out and send it back to the population. Do you support something like that?
Yeah, and just to add to your explanation, I'd also add that the appealing thing about the carbon fee and dividend is that it's revenue neutral. So it raises the price of carbon in order to steer people towards renewable energy, but it provides that that payment back, it rebates that back to households so that essentially it's a zero-sum game. Yes, I do support it. What's under debate is whether it would have some progressivity to it, so that, in other words, if you're low income, you're getting a full rebate, but if you're a billionaire, you're getting less than a full rebate, and that money is used then to help jumpstart the various green projects and technology so that we can provide the other sources of energy and help them get jump-started more quickly. It provides a revenue stream for that.
And of course, as soon as we start to talk about climate, we quickly get into all manner of other energy issues. And one of the pressing issues here in the United States is fracking, which is, of course, the pumping of high temperature chemicals underground to break up shale formations and release pockets of natural gas. Jan Moore from Livestream is asking, what steps would you take to ban fracking, if indeed you would ban fracking?
Yes, fracking should be banned. It's extremely dangerous to our water supplies. Our water supplies are imperiled with a drought now impacting 60% of the continental U.S. We have serious water problems, and we should not be playing Russian roulette and fundamentally putting our water supplies at grave risk through fracking. And it's outrageous that this technology is considered private, essentially, and a trade secret, so that even the chemicals that are being injected deep into the ground, putting our water supplies at risk, are not being revealed, which speaks volumes about their safety, that the industry does not feel able to disclose the chemicals that it's using. So the solution here is not disclosure of the chemicals, because that's not going to solve the problem. There is just no way on earth that we should be putting our water supplies at risk and opening up an additional carbon supply. All the dangers we're facing right now with record heat, storm, drought, fire, rising costs of food, this is happening, as Bill McKibben pointed out, with less than 1 degree centigrade temperature rise already. Less than 1 degree, yet the science is now predicting 6 degrees centigrade temperature rise over just the course of the next century. So this is not livable, this is not survivable. We cannot be opening up new sources of carbon. We should be phasing them out as quickly as possible on an emergency basis. This is definitely unthinkable to be opening up new sources of carbon now. How would we do that? One way to do that is by instructing the EPA to actually protect the environment and our health that depends on it. And there's no question that this technology puts our water supplies and our health and our climate at grave risk, and it should not be allowed.
It's interesting that you mentioned the EPA, because we have a question about the EPA coming in at the moment. Of course, we talked about the carbon fee and dividend, which is one way people have talked about regulating carbon dioxide emissions, but people also, in the political discourse, is also the discussion of either, on one side of the aisle, expanding the Clean Air Act to include carbon dioxide, and then on the other side of the aisle, actually reining in the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act, of course, is the legislation that's been used by the EPA to control other sorts of atmospheric pollutants. Where do you stand on the Clean Air Act and whether it should include carbon dioxide?
It certainly should include carbon dioxide. This is a pollutant that puts the environment and our health at grave risk. Our health is very much dependent on climate, on water supplies, food supplies, and all the rest. So I think to leave carbon out simply because it is, emerging later in the game. It's not a traditional pollutant, but it's very much a pollutant, and it's imperative that it be regulated under the Clean Air Act as a pollutant that has grave implications for human health and the environment. So the ocean acidity, has markedly increased, where we're losing our coral reefs. We're putting so many ocean species at risk. There's absolutely no question but that carbon has a profound and dramatic impact on the environment, already has. It would be unthinkable not to regulate it as a significant pollutant.
Somebody calling themselves Phil Bunch via the web is asking, you know, even with these policies, how, as a Green Party president, would you be able to push legislation forward without Green House of Congress and a Green Senate?
Great, and thank you to Phil for asking that question. It's very important. It applies not only to climate solutions, it applies to healthcare as a human right through Medicare for all. It applies to ending student debt, to ending the Wall Street bailouts and breaking up the big banks that are too big to fail and too big to jail. You know, it essentially applies to every public interest policy that we support as Greens and that we advance in this campaign. Fortunately, there's a very good solution. And there are some recent examples of how this works. The solution is called democracy, and how it works is illustrated by what happened with the SOPA bill, the Stop Online Piracy Act, which was going to censor the internet. It was considered a slam dunk. There was no way that ordinary mortals were going to stop it, except that the word got out. The word got out and it spread like a wildfire on the internet, and within 2 weeks, that bill was stopped in its tracks. How? Because people became informed and empowered to be the democracy we're supposed to have. The president, if she or he wanted, could be not only a commander-in-chief, but a organizer-in-chief, and could ensure that the broader public was aware of a bill coming up, say next week, that there would be a bill to, to prevent fracking, to establish a ban on fracking, or a bill to establish the Green New Deal and jumpstart 25 million jobs to begin the recovery of the economy through a green transformation. The president has the power to go on primetime TV, to go on radio public service announcements, internet, email, you name it. The president has enormous power to inform everyday people, provide 3 key talking points, and encourage people to take those talking points to our elected officials, and to make it really darn well clear to them that we got our eye on them, we're watching what they're doing, we know why this bill was passed, why it would be a betrayal of us, the everyday people of this country, not to vote for it. And because these are policies that people support broadly, we have enormous power to actually enact them by having the president act as a whistleblower on Congress to let people know what's coming up and the truth about those bills, and then enabling democracy to be the engine that drives these policies that the public is clamoring for to save our future, our jobs, and our climate.
So just going backwards a little bit, back to the transition from fossil fuels to a renewable energy economy again, we talked about fracking, which of course natural gas is one of the things that has been promoted as a transitionary form of energy as we move away from coal and oil, using natural gas and then hopefully moving into a renewable energy economy. And Steve is asking, not only is, we've talked about whether natural gas would be a good transition fuel, but there's also this question of biomass and liquid fuels, things like ethanol, diesel made from plant-based sources, and we've seen tremendous problems as croplands have been turned to growing fuel crops. What's your view on whether we should use this kind of fuel, and what would you suggest as an interim measure as we wait to build renewable energy systems?
Great. So yeah, I think you've summarized the problem very well, that using biomass tends to draw down on a limited scarce food supply to start with. There's some questions about, for example, whether hemp, which is a very hardy plant, whether a a plant like hemp could be used to grow in areas where food would not be grown. And could that be the basis for biofuel? And I think that warrants investigation to see if that is the case. But we do need to be very cautious about drawing down on food supplies for corn ethanol. What do we do in the meantime? I think it's really important to point out two things. One is that we can get the biggest bang for the buck right now by enacting conservation, efficiency, weatherization, and we can put effectively millions of people to work overnight with minimal change, minimal training. People who desperately need jobs can be put to work right away. So there's so much we can do. The cost of that is said to be something like 2 or 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So this is where we can start. Another really important thing to keep in mind is Germany's recent experience, where they created a solar sector very quickly by creating a real industrial policy, not just providing a single tax break to a single large multinational corporation, as in the case of Solinda, for example, which is sort of a corporation with an inside connection, but rather, creating a whole industrial policy whereby we provide incentives, we ensure that there's a market. And what Germany found was that they brought the cost down so quickly and they created so many jobs in the expanding solar sector where they had to very quickly withdraw their supports, their subsidies, and their incentives because it worked so well. So I think the important thing is for us to step up to the plate and put our money where our mouth is, where our survival is, and do the right thing. Is there money? Of course there's money. We're spending trillions on wars for oil, Wall Street bailouts, and tax breaks for the wealthy. Trillions. Actually, a trillion at least on each of those every year. So we have plenty of money to create a Marshall Plan, an absolute state of emergency, because we have both emergencies, not only the climate, but also the economic emergency. So this is a win-win. I think it's a matter of simply, harnessing the public will that's already there and ensuring people that they don't have to sacrifice their job in order to save the climate. In fact, there will be no jobs, if we don't move urgently to begin saving the climate right now. There is a win-win here.
Jill, you touched briefly on how you would pay for the Green Deal plan and how we would pay for the transfer over to renewable economy. And I think this is an important point just to dwell on a little bit, because we're talking about massive change, and people will be asking, how do we pay for it? And so I was hoping you could expand. You mentioned the military budgets and how that military budget is tied inextricably to our use of fossil fuels. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how we'll pay for these programs.
That's right. And that's why I wanted to mention early on about how the Green New Deal makes wars for oil obsolete. It does that by meeting our energy needs here at home through renewable energy sources and conservation and efficiency. So right now we have a military budget that's costing us $1 trillion a year for this bloated military industrial security complex. This is twice the size of the military budget just 10 years ago in the early 2000s. And we are certainly not twice as secure. Just to look at the blowback taking place right now across the Middle East. And this wasn't only reaction to a horrendous, offensive and outrageous anti-Muslim film. Soldiers, US soldiers and NATO soldiers were being shot up basically by the Afghani soldiers that they are supposed to be training and turning the war effort over to in Afghanistan, long before that film was released. A recent poll showed that 75% of people in Pakistan actually identify the United States as their enemy. And this is, very directly related to war policies that have been adopted not only by the Bush administration, but markedly expanded by the Obama administration, of the drone bombing. On day 3 in office, the president, markedly expanded the bombing into Pakistan. So, this is this hyper-militarism makes us less secure, not more secure. We can cut the military back to year 2000 levels, which means bringing hundreds of thousands of dollars, I'm sorry, hundreds of billions of dollars back home every year, as well as bringing our troops back from Iraq and from Afghanistan and from the bases that are scattered around the world in over 140 countries, over 1,000 bases. So these are, this is just one area of savings that can be used to support the Green New Deal. It's estimated that the Green New Deal would cost approximately 600 or upwards potentially to $700 billion to get it jump-started in the first year. A major portion of that cost can be paid for by downsizing the military. And then, likewise, tax on Wall Street transactions, a capital gains tax, taxing capital gains as income, creating a truly progressive income tax. This can bring in many hundreds of billions of dollars a year as well. Stopping the Wall Street bailouts, which continue apace to the tune of trillions of dollars now in this latest policy using. So there are a variety of ways by which we can save money and have the funds to jumpstart the Green New Deal, including addressing the economic Bill of Rights, which is attached to the Green New Deal and provides for health care for everyone through Medicare for All, as well as free public higher education, and putting a moratorium on home foreclosures as well. We can afford to do all of this by stopping the squandering of these many trillions of dollars a year and directing those resources where we need them.
We've talked about this question about being a green president with both houses potentially held, well, probably realistically held by other parties, and so that's one political reality we've talked about. We've talked about how to pay for the programs that you've talked about, but somebody named Spirit, calling him or herself Spirit, is asking about the financial power of the fossil fuel industry. And one of the things you mentioned was recreating
I don't know if you can.
The fossil fuel industry itself speaks more than any politician seems to be able to because of money.
Thank you, Colin. I lost you there for a minute, but I think I have the gist of what you were saying in Spirit's question, about the political power of the fossil fuel industry. And again, this is a generic issue where there is concentrated economic power. There is also political power, which is why we are moving backwards, not forwards, on fossil fuels, on nuclear, on the free trade agreements that continue to send our jobs overseas and depress wages here at home, the privatization of our education, the cutting of support for public higher education, etc. On all these fronts, we're moving in the wrong direction, not in the area of public interest, but on behalf of the foxes who are basically guarding the chicken coop, who really are the chicken coop. And this is why it's so critical, in my view. We're not going to be able to solve the climate crisis independently, just as the climate crisis. This is an inherently political problem, and it requires a political solution, which means building a coalition that can get to critical mass. I think that has everything to do with bringing together students, especially, who are bearing the brunt of all of this, as well as people who are fighting for jobs, who are fighting for peace, who are fighting for a nuclear-free future, who are fighting for affordable health care through Medicare for All, and so on. So in part, there's a political answer, which is why we have the Green Party, so that we can get to critical mass in building this coalition. But also, as part of the fix here, we need democracy fixes. And this is what the Green New Deal actually calls for: democracy reforms, as well as the specific solutions for energy and employment. So key among those reforms are campaign finance reform, getting the money out of politics, ensuring that corporations are not people, they do not have the rights of speech, that we the people own our political system, not the wealthy and powerful few. The minute we do that, then suddenly it's one person, one vote, not $1, one vote, which is the system we have right now. And while we're talking about dollars, I just want to put in a pitch for people who do have dollars in their pocket to consider making a contribution to our campaign. And you can do that on our website at jillstein.org. We were able to raise about $500,000 in the primary part of the campaign. We put all of that money virtually into getting on the ballot. We've succeeded in doing that. We're on the ballot for 85% of voters. If we can raise that money again, now in the general portion of the election, we have an enormous potential to make a huge impact. And I just want to cite the fact that there are 90 million voters right now who are planning to boycott this election. There are 90 million eligible voters who are planning to stay home because they know that Barack Obama and Mitt Romney do not represent them. They badly need to hear about us. We could totally turn this election on its head if we're able to get the word out. So I encourage you to make a contribution if you can. If you donated during the primary season, consider making a similar donation if you can during this general part of the election. It could make a huge impact. We've crept up in the polls from nowhere to 1% to 2%, even before we had begun to put resources into actually doing that outreach to the many constituencies who are clamoring for the solutions that we're bringing. So we're very hopeful that we can lock in the gains that we've made and potentially go much further if we can get to that fully funded. The fully is very modest for us compared to the other campaigns. We're talking about raising basically $500,000 again. So I encourage you, please go to jillstein.org and donate if you're able. Thank you.
And am I correct, Jill, in saying that what contributions people make will actually be matched by federal funds, according to the...
That's the hope. And in order to do that, we need a funded campaign so that we can do this outreach. Because we've come up to 2% without even having started the campaign, we're hopeful we can double that and a little more. Because the match comes if we break 5%. This is a very tall order. It's not easy to do, but we're in a different era. We're in extraordinary times, and people are getting that this politics of fear that told you can't vote for your values. People have realized that politics of fear has just brought us everything we were afraid of, from the expanding war to the Wall Street bailouts to the meltdown of our climate. We've gotten it all with a Democrat in the White House, in fact, in greater quantities than we got from George Bush, comparing policy by policy. So it's really important to get past that politics of fear, replace it with the politics of courage. If we do that, we're very hopeful there is a possibility of breaking the 5%. And if we break the 5%, we get a huge match. Basically, we would get $20 million. If we raised $500,000 and we can break the 5%, we get $20 million. That's effectively a 40-to-1 match. That is an absolutely staggering match. But I think what's even more staggering is the incredible power of democracy that would unleash if we go into the next election, starting on November 7th. True alternative green candidates promoting a green future and the Green New Deal and the jobs we need right now, and bailing out the students, not the banks, and making public higher education free, and providing health care as a human right through Medicare for all, taxing the rich, downsizing the military. The campaigns and the candidates that promote that as Greens will be on the ballot from day one of their campaigns. They won't have to spend 90% of their campaign just getting on the ballot and then basically have 6 weeks to run a real campaign. This would be essentially the jumping off point to start a real campaign to give the American people a real voice and a real choice in elections coming for the indefinite future at that point, would become a real player and provide that breakthrough that the American people are waiting for a political system that actually serves us.
You know, you have a very hopeful vision, you mentioned the 90 million voters who are intending to boycott the election, and I think it's, you know, partly it's indeed because of the candidates, but it's also in what I'm hearing in the campaign, on my own campaign trail, is people just don't believe that their vote makes a difference because of the money. And so, you know, you talked briefly, and I think that most, certainly I and most of the people watching would agree with you about getting the money out of politics and reversing corporate personhood, and that Supreme Court decision that allowed for corporate personhood known as Citizens United. I think probably everybody here, chances are, agrees with you in those views, but I also believe that what people are really pulling their hair about is not knowing how it can be done. People talk about a constitutional amendment, but you know the barriers to constitutional amendments are so high. So how would you actually make it so that the corporations, the big international corporations, weren't interfering with your policies and platform? How would you actually get their money out of politics?
Well, let me tell you one way that a president could pull the rug right out from under money in politics, starting on day one, without even having to wait for a congressional bill. Although, in my view, um, you know, there's a lot we can do in terms of congressional action and a constitutional amendment. There's a lot we could do to speed up that process, to basically move it into fast forward, into fourth gear or 10th gear. But even before that, on day one, the president can instruct, if she or he wanted, could instruct the Federal Communications Commission to actually open up the airwaves for use by the public. How about we open up the public airwaves for public use? And the president can require the FCC to do that and can make appointments contingent on that. So what happens when you open up the public airwaves? The dirty politicians can keep making their dirty deals all they want. But guess what? It no longer buys them a monopoly on airtime. Because if we had a level playing field for the media, for all qualified candidates who've met the criteria, which is basically to get on the ballot, sufficient to be able to win the race. You know, if all qualified candidates have equal access to airtime, then it doesn't matter how many dirty backroom deals the candidate has made with the fossil fuels or the Koch brothers or the health insurance companies or the nuclear power companies, etc. Doesn't make a darn bit of difference because we all get to get our message out. So, you know, we could turn politics on its head by having a organizer-in-chief in that critical position in the White House to be able to begin implementing the reforms that we need. Once we had equal airtime, or even barring equal airtime, once we had a organizer-in-chief who was actually willing to go on air and preview the critical votes coming up, we could move those votes. So, for example, on Citizens United, if you thought that Congress's hands are tied, well, you know what? There's a lot the president could do to inform people about that constitutional amendment. Because if we really had, you know, public clarity about what it means for corporations to claim, you know, human rights, basically, the rights of personhood, you know, when people understand what that means, people in strong majorities support taking back those rights of personhood, which have been stolen by corporations, and returning them to people. So we could move such an amendment rather quickly, get the state legislatures to pass it, or convene a constitutional convention to get it passed. Things don't move when there's not a real engine of democracy to drive them forward. But if we had a president in the White House, we could turn the White House into a greenhouse, and a whole lot of things would begin to change very quickly.
You know, we talked about, this is taking a backward step, Jill, but we talked about fracking, and in some ways, you know, fracking has become the trendy energy issue, but one thing that's been on the table for a really long time is mountaintop removal and what's been happening in the southeast as opposed to the northeast. And so somebody calling themselves the Loaf 1011 asks, what's your view on mountaintop removal and coal mining, and how would you end it?
Yes, I mean, I think that there are a number of ways to end it. So for one thing, mountaintop removal, there's no way in the world that that can be claimed to be safe for the environment. I mean, mountaintop removal poisons water supplies and poisons streams and poisons the air and makes people sick. So it ought to be under the EPA's purview. And while Barack Obama began to expand the permits for mountaintop removal, this is absolutely wrong. And it should be stopped, again, under the purview of the EPA to protect the environment and to protect human health. And I would say the same thing for coal, given that coal produces CO2 under the umbrella of limiting carbon emissions and beginning to phase them out as quickly as possible. We need to begin phasing out coal and not moving into this bogus proposal that there is such a thing as clean coal. There is no such thing as clean coal. And we shouldn't have to go, trillions of dollars down that road of building these plants and investing in this research, which is essentially a public relations campaign on behalf of the coal companies. So we don't need to go there. It's purely the power of, of the political purse that creates these fantasies to start with. And if we had candidates in office who were not bought and paid for by the fossil fuel and the coal and the, and the mountaintop removal industries and the fracking and all that, then, this nonsense would not be entertained in the halls of power.
Jill, I think we're just going to have about 5 minutes more. So I wanted to give you the chance to say whatever you felt you'd like to in closing out. And also, I think to some people this might seem a trivial issue, but to others it's an issue of great symbolic importance. When you move into the White House, will you be putting the solar panels back on the roof?
Well, when I move into the White House, we will be turning the White House into a greenhouse for all that that implies. So while the president, allowed his wife to build an organic garden on the White House lawn, he invited Monsanto and, the usual suspects into the White House, into the FDA, into USDA, the Department of Agriculture, and all the rest, invited the industries as well as their lobbyists to come and make policy and write bills. So, in no uncertain terms, we will throw Wall Street and Monsanto and GE and Goldman Sachs, who, and all the Wall Street brokers who are very invested in fossil fuels, who are pushing this fossil fuel future forward, who are compelled and committed to exploiting every last ounce of coal and fossil fuel on this planet without regard to this, the devastation that we're already facing. So yeah, we're gonna throw them out, and we're gonna bring the public interest back in. So I think it's just really important for people to know that, number one, we have the solutions. This is not rocket science, as Bill McKibben was pointing out. We know what to do. It just requires that we have the political will. And the real question is who is we? Because we have the political will, but our elected officials in the establishment party of the Democrats, like the Republicans, do not have the political will. And it's really important to acknowledge that. But Barack Obama, in fact, embraced drill, baby, drill, and went far beyond George Bush in opening up the offshore oil drilling, even in the wake of the Gulf oil disaster. There have been no improvements in that technology. There's no new safety there. Yet he's been expanding offshore oil drilling massively, including right on up to the Arctic, which he gave the thumbs up to Shell or oil to go ahead and start drilling, even as the Arctic ice reaches its lowest ebb ever. The president gave the thumbs up for more mountaintop removal, for fracking, for opening up our national parks to coal and natural gas. So, and the president went on to undermine the international climate accords in Durban, South Africa, and gave the thumbs up to nuclear power. And there's a whole generation of new nuclear power plants that are in the making right now. This is even in the wake of Fukushima and the unresolved disaster that Fukushima continues to be. We have 104 Chernobyls waiting to happen in this country, and we need to be closing down our nuclear plants, not expanding them. So, you know, that's the dark side. But I think it's really important for people to acknowledge that the politics of fear has brought us everything that we were afraid of, including the drill baby drill policies and more from this president. So it's really important that we say no to this politics of fear. It's basically a fear campaign that relies on psychological warfare because it's the only weapon they have. We have the power of truth, science, justice, and now even public opinion on our side. And poll after poll, a large majority of the American public is very worried, devastated about climate change. But they always frame the solution as a choice between fixing the climate or having a job. And that's actually false, because the only jobs are going to come through an economy that can actually sustain the climate crisis that we're facing right now. So they go together, and the public is there in supporting them. And we actually ran referendums here in Massachusetts posing this question and found that between 75 and 95% of voters in every city and town tested, and there were about 24 of them, a huge majority wants to actually redefine economic development so that it meets both our needs for clean renewable energy and our needs for jobs. So we can have a win-win. If we had nothing more than students going to the polls, remember there are 36 million of them, students who are effectively indentured servants, students and recent graduates who know that they do not have hope going forward, that the Democrats and the Republicans alike have promised to stay the course on student debt, just like they both promised to continue with drill baby drill and basically throw us over the cliff here on climate change. So just that body of students alone, if the word got out, we could potentially win this race. And again, there are 90 million voters who are not going to vote because they don't know about us. They don't know they have something to go out and vote for. So if we're all on the internet and on Facebook and social media, think about Tahrir Square in Tunisia. As Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We do have the power. We are the ones we've been waiting for. The Democrats and Republicans alike do not have a single exit strategy on the table. Not a single exit strategy, but there's plenty of exit strategy out there to actually fix this problem, to turn this breaking point that we faced, a breaking point for people and the planet, our democracy, our civil liberties, and our economy, you name it. It's all accelerating in the wrong direction right now, but we can turn that around. We can turn the breaking point into the tipping point. It's all a matter of our standing up. We have the solutions. We can do that faster than you could possibly imagine. Remember, in Tahrir Square, it took them 3 weeks. And whether we win the office or simply win the day by driving these solutions forward and recovering our political voice and our political courage, that's the win. If we're ever to win it, we've got to begin it. Beginning it alone is a huge win, and it can jumpstart us towards that victory, which is not so far away, the day when we do turn the White House into a greenhouse, and all the positions beneath the White House as well, to truly take back our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future we deserve. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Colin, so very much for being our host tonight. I look forward to more conversations to come, and hope everyone will join us on our website as jillstein.org, so we can go forward as a team right up through November 6th and continuing on after that to continue building the party as the political voice that we need going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for a comprehensive conversation. Thank you as a citizen, as a candidate myself, as no impact man, for being the only presidential candidate who is looking forward towards a future that is both better for the habitat that we depend upon and better for the people too. To you, those of you who have been with us tonight and watching us, thank you so much for your patience with our technical difficulties. Please remember that you have a voice. Do what you can. Use your social networks, both on and offline, if you believe in what Jill is saying, and I hope you do. Thank you to Bill McKibben for being with us, and thank you for the technical people that have sorted out our problems. And lastly, if you want to help, either by volunteering or giving money, go to jillstein.org. Thank you very much.